Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm just trying to sort my hair out. There we go. Talk about female vanity. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, where we are going to be chatting about how to buy commercially developed assessment tools. It's lovely to see all the regular faces. Hi, everybody. And once again, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your very, very busy day to spend this with me. As the regulars know, I absolutely love our webinar Fridays. They are just the highlight of my fortnight. So, yeah, it's fantastic that there's so many people that has joined me for today's webinar. We've got almost a full house. We've got, I think we've got 497 people. So what that means is that come question answer time, I may not have time to get to everybody's questions. If for any reason I don't get to your question, or if you think of any questions after the webinar, I will give you guys the email address to send emails to or to send questions to. Just get this right. Give me a second. Bear with me, I'm sitting without my IT team today. So, yeah, there we go. So, guys, criteria for buying assessment tools for RTOs. For those of you that do not know me or that are new to the webinar, my name is Alex Schroder. I am the CEO of VETPrep Australia. And guys, VETPrep Australia does a number of things. We do sanction management. I'm a forensic compliance auditor. I'm an administrative appeals tribunal specialist, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to, as always, I'm not going to spend time sitting here and telling you guys about myself. If you do want to know more about me, you are more than welcome to go onto LinkedIn, look at my LinkedIn page, and yeah, it has my whole pedigree there, I think. So, quick housekeeping. As I said just now, if there's no time for me to get to your question at the end of the webinar, or if you have questions that you think of after the webinar, please send your questions to info@complianceinstitute.edu.au. The ARCP team will forward your questions to me, and if I have time, or sometimes I find that I've got time to just, instead of trying to reply to you, just give you a quick phone call, or sometimes I come across questions that are easier addressed in a phone call. So if you do have a question and you absolutely do not want a phone call whatsoever, please just indicate in your email to say, hey, under no circumstance do I want Alex to call me and talk this through with me. And obviously, I will respect that. Exciting news, guys. Over the last few months, I've been saying to you guys, hey, we want to find out who wants masterclasses. And we've had a tremendous response to that. And I will be telling you guys probably at the next webinar. We've got some really, really exciting news about masterclasses coming up. And we're going to be running masterclasses on some really, really exciting and necessary compliance issues as well. But more about that in about a fortnight's time when I'm officially allowed to speak about it. In the meantime, I'm just having fun with the VETPrep and the ARCP team planning them. Guys, just a quick reminder that we've been running trainer and assessor VETPD webinars as well. We've been running them since last year, and I think it's the last Friday of every month when we have the compliance webinars, and then I think there's about a half an hour break, and then we go into the trainer and assessor VETPD webinars. So if the trainers and assessors in your RTO has not signed up for the webinars, the VETPD webinars for trainers and assessors are on the RTOPD.com.au website. They are free webinars, and they've been designed to help trainers and assessors meet their requirements under clause 1.13 without obviously needing to go and spend money in doing so. Quick one, guys, ASQA has, after sort of slowing things down during the COVID period, ASQA has been very active with audits and so forth. And as most of you know, I actually sit on a number, or I'm part of the ASPA Stakeholder Liaison Group. And as part of that, I sit on a number of subcommittees with ASPA. And we have been told that there has been a number of RTOs that have been issued with intents to cancel, sanctions coming up due to non-compliance during an audit. So if your RTO has not had an ASPA audit recently, please make sure that you are audit ready, because ASPA is back in full activity again. And although they are not as ferocious as ASPA was up until 2018, it is still a case of, and look at, they're very forgiving, and they're not very forgiving, but they're very collaborative with RTOs that are non-compliant. However, as I said, if your RTO has not had a recent regulatory audit, please make sure that your house is clean, that your house is in order. Take some time to go through every single bit of your compliance, or of your RTO's compliance. Make sure that you guys are ASPA ready, because we also have intel that there have been a number of instances where ASPA have walked into an RTO without notice, and with obviously with the necessary documentation for them to be there, and that they are just walking in and surprising RTOs, obviously where they deem it necessary. So for the fourth time, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, if you haven't had a recent ASPA audit, take the time, prioritize it, make it an absolutely high priority. Make sure that your compliance is up to scratch. Make sure that you are ASPA ready, because ASPA has they've upped the ante insofar as their auditing practices. So what are we looking at today? Today we are looking at the requirements of clause 1.3. We are looking at the common mistakes found in assessment tools. We're looking at RPL tools. We are looking at 7 steps in quality assuring and implementing assessment tools, and also the consequence of non-compliant assessment tools. Guys, clause 1.3 says that your RTO is required. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read it from the screen. You can read yourself. But in essence, clause 1.3 says that your RTO must ensure that at all times that you have the necessary and valid assessment resources to enable students to fully demonstrate their competence in a training product. Now, when we speak about assessment tools, the way that your assessment tools are structured is certainly up to each RTO. However, assessment tools generally include short answer questions, and what short answer questions, or the best way to think about short answer questions, and also the best way to structure your assessment tools is, I know that when we write assessment tools for RTOs, and before I go further, we actually don't write and sell assessment tools. We only do assessment tools for RTOs where we've come in, done an audit or a forensic audit, and where we found their assessment tools are lacking, or if an RTO has been sanctioned and they need to either been sanctioned or found non-compliant, and then they need our help with their assessment tools. That is when we'll step in. So if you're sitting there and you're wanting to ask me, does VETPrep write assessment tools? We do not. We specialize in compliance rectification. Anyway, so assessment tools, as I said, they usually include short answer questions. Now, when we develop assessment tools or rectify assessment tools for our clients, what we use the short answer questions for, or what we cover during the short answer questions, is we go into the required knowledge evidence in a unit of competency, and we address those required knowledge criteria in short answer questions. And the way, or the reason why we do it, is that although in so many activities and in so many portfolio items, etc., throughout the rest of your assessment instruments, the knowledge evidence areas or the knowledge evidence criteria is inadvertently covered, if you address all of your knowledge criteria in your short answer assessment, your short answer question assessment task, then at least you know that you have covered those off. And if they are then covered off, more times during other assessment tasks, that's fine. But at least if you write one assessment task where you cover off all of your knowledge area, all of your knowledge criteria as short answer questions, they're done and dusted. And then you don't have to go and worry about how you incorporate those in the rest of your assessment activities. Assessment tools may also include project work, they might be workplace products, they might be observables, etc. And so often we come across, actually, I want to go back to the previous slide for 1 second. Guys, project work can be simple, it can be complex, as can work-based products be. To give you guys an idea, ARCP offers the diploma of RTO compliance management that I wrote a few years ago. And one of the units in the diploma course is managing your RTO's scope of registration. Now, we're actually just busy revamping. In fact, no, we've just finished revamping ARCP's assessment tools. And when we revamped and rewrote the assessment tools for that unit, managing your RTO scope of registration, what we did there is we did a combination of project work and work-based products. And what that does is it gives the assessment candidate, it gives them the opportunity to actually go and develop documents that they would use in their RTO in any case. So do not shy away from project work or work-based products, because depending on who your audience is and depending on how you have customized and contextualized your training product, you could find that your students, your learners, may actually get huge benefit out of giving them or out of assessment tasks that are project-based or project work or work-based products, because it helps with their learning as well. So often RTOs forget about their RTOs forget about their RPL tools. Guys, it doesn't matter if your RTO very seldom have people that want to RPL. And look, we hear this the whole time. We hear this all the time. We go in, we do an audit within an RTO. We ask them where are their RPL tools, and they say, look, we don't have RPL tools. And why not? Well, because nobody ever asks us for an RPL. Guys, remember that unless the training product, be it a skill set, qualification, a unit of competency, or similar, unless it specifically prohibits assessment via RPL, the NVR Act and the RTO standards say that you must have RPL tools for every single training product that your RTO is delivering, and that is also on scope. Now, sometimes it's a case of with your RPL tools, you may have one holistic RPL tool for a qualification or a skill set. You may have an individual RPL tools for individual units of competency. Regardless of how your RPL tools are structured and regardless of how your RPL toolkit is or toolkits are structured, please do not forget that during an audit, be it an ASPA audit or even with state funding contract audits, you will be asked for your RPL tools, and if you are not able to produce compliant RPL tools, you will be found to be non-compliant. And guys, it's not negotiable. So for those of you that have been attending my webinars for a while, you'll know by now that one of the biggest bugbears, or a big bugbear that I have, is commercially developed assessment tools. And the reason for that, we'll go into the reason for that shortly. So often, or almost always, when people buy commercially developed assessment tools, the developers, the resellers, or the companies that you buy them from, you'll always see these big, bold statements of our tools are compliant. Our tools have passed through 10 million and 10 ASCO audits. Our tools never fail. All of these big, bold statements. But then they also have, in small print, they also have, it is ultimately the RTO's responsibility to ensure that these assessment tools are actually compliant. They also have small print, or in the small print, they also include that if the assessment tools fail audit, they will fix them. So these are all statements made, I guess, to give the clients some kind of peace of mind that they are buying good quality assessment tools. However, if your RTO uses commercially developed assessment tools or is thinking of purchasing commercially developed assessment tools, ask yourself a few questions. When the commercially developed, or when the commercial assessment development company says our tools are compliant, whose judgment are they basing that statement on? If they say that their tools have passed 10 million and 10 audits, where's the proof in the pudding? And when they say, hey, we'll fix the tools if they fail audit, remember, by then it's too late. So I'm going to just go and unpack that a little bit. The only foolproof state evidence that tools are 100% compliant can be taken from the assessment tools actually passing audit. And it's audited by the regulator, not by a compliance consultant and not by the company that's selling the tools. Because at the end of the day, our tools need to pass the regulator's standards of audit, because they obviously base their audit activities on the NVR Act. Now, it's also a case of when they say their tools are compliant, that's all fair and well. And even if these assessment tools do pass an ASCO audit, please remember one thing, that during an ASCO audit, these days, they don't look at the full suite of assessment tools anymore either. So it's a case of maybe your RTO is sitting with 2 or 3 tools that have been audited, that have passed audit, but it doesn't mean that all of your tools are compliant. And we'll chat about that a bit further on in more detail. Talk is cheap. So when a developer says our tools have passed 30 ASCO audits in the last 12 months, guys, at the end of the day, my lights has gone off. At the end of the day, it's a case of guys, my apologies. I just realized that I went on silent for a minute. I was just speaking about when developers make the claim. Sorry guys, can I just check, can anybody tell me, I've just had a message to say that people can't hear me. I know I had a problem for about 10 seconds. Can I just have a few people just tell me, can you hear me now? I've got a hand there. Yes. No sound good now. I can hear you now. Oh, guys, thank you so much. I don't know what happened there, but it's obviously been fixed. Try and get my train of thought back. So where there are statements of these tools that pass X number of audits, the if your tools fail audit, we'll fix them. For an RTO to go into an audit with non-compliant assessment tools and then to need to fix them after audit, guys, it is an absolute nightmare. And as we go through this webinar, you'll see why. So where I'm coming to from there is that for a commercial developer to say, hey, buy our tools, go and spend $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 on our tools, And they're compliant because they've passed so many audits. But it's okay if you fail audit, we'll fix it. You need to take your own steps, and we will go back to that just now. You need to take your own steps to ensure that your tools are compliant before you've actually implemented them. Because for your tools to fail audit, by then it's just too late. So common mistakes that we find in assessment tools is that candidate or assessor instructions on the assessment requirements are unclear. So often we find instructions that are not definitive enough, and without having definitive instructions, remember when you come to the rules of evidence in clause 1.8 of the standards, if your instructions aren't clear, if they are not definitive, then your tools are not going to meet the rules of evidence of clause 1.8. Often we find ambiguous assessment instructions. Once again, that goes back to clause 1.8. And so often we find that the assessment tools, especially where assessment tools have been done very holistically, we find that they don't actually meet all of the requirements of the entire unit of competency or the entire training product. So often we find that not all of the PCs have been addressed. Often not all of the performance evidence criteria have been addressed, the knowledge evidence criteria, the foundation skills, assessment requirements, etc. Another big thing in assessment tools, and where assessment tools often fall down, is the lack of sufficiency in assessment requirements. And guys, when I speak about the lack of sufficiency, it is a case of, let's say for argument's sake, that the unit of competency in the assessment requirements, that it may specifically say that the candidate needs to demonstrate the performance evidence criteria on at least 2 occasions or at least 3 occasions. Unless your assessment tool follows those requirements and those specifications, you are not going to have a compliant assessment tool. There may be insufficient benchmark answers. Another thing that we see all the time is an assessment tool may say list 5 common mistakes that, or it might say, hey, list 5 common audit methodologies. List 5 audit methodologies. We then find that the benchmark answers may only list 5 methodologies. If your assessment requirement is to list 5 instances for argument's sake, and there are more than 5 instances, your benchmark answers need to actually be wider and broader than the 5 instances or the 5 the 5 examples, simply because not every single student is going to go and write or go and provide the same 5 instances. And remember, your benchmark answers are there so that your assessors have got very clear instructions on what answers are suitable and what answers are acceptable and which aren't. And unless we have really clear benchmark instructions, we also find that that is where assessors start using their own judgment far too laterally. And when that comes in, we are then at risk of not meeting the principles of assessment of clause 1.8. So benchmark answers really need to be specific. Often we also see benchmark answers that are something like answers may vary depending on the student's own situation, or may vary because of the student's, depending on how the student answers this question. If you have assessment tools that have benchmark answers like that, your assessment tool will fail audit. Not saying it might, I'm telling you it will fail a regulatory audit. There's absolutely no 2 ways about it. So when you look at your benchmark answers, always remember that the purpose of those benchmark answers is for the assessors to be able to meet the requirements of or to be able to meet the principles of assessment. We often find that observation checklists are messy and they're non-compliant. Remember that your observation checklist can't simply be a copy and a paste of the requirements of the training product. They've got to be contextualized. They've got to be unpacked. Your observation checklist must include detailed specifics for the assessors in what they are looking for when they are carrying out the assessment. So let's say, for argument's sake, you've got an observation checklist that says, or the requirement in the observation checklist is non-verbal communication skills. Does the candidate demonstrate sufficient non-verbal communication skills? Non-verbal communication skills equals, in most instances, body language, and therefore your tool or your benchmark, your observation checklist must unpack what non-verbal communication skills the assessor needs to look for. It must unpack, if it's body language, it must unpack what specifically the assessor must be looking for. Because even when it comes to assessment, remember, different people have different experiences, different expectations, and different interpretations of body language. When it comes to role play instructions, your role play instructions need to be very, very, very specific. If your assessment tools do contain role play instructions, you need to go down specificity to as far as how long does the role play need to last for? What must be covered in the role play? How many people apart from your candidate must participate in the role play? What the expectation is of the role play participants, not your candidate, but the role play participants. So when you look at your benchmark answers, please consider all of those criteria as well, because it all comes down to, and guys, nothing in the standards and nothing in the NVR Act says, this is what an observation checklist needs to look like. This is how to go and write a role play. Those are all things that you learn when you do courses on how to write assessment tools. However, when people say, but the standards don't say it, remember that all of your assessment tools need to be developed in such a manner that they meet the requirements of clause 1.8. Give me a second just to have a drink. When it comes to our RPL tools need to have very clear instructions for the candidates, very clear instructions for the assessors, as well as for third-party referees. Your RPL requirements must be contextualized, guys. Once again, your RPL tool the criteria RPL tool must not simply be copied and pasted from the criteria of the training product, so from the criteria of the unit of competency. And the reason for that is this, and I guess this goes for all of our assessment tools, is remember that we operate in a very, very unique, niche little bubble. And I always use the example, if you're at a dinner party or if you're at a barbecue and there's 2 people from the vet sector and 20 people from outside of the vet sector, if the 2 vet people are having a conversation, 9 times out of 10, the rest of the guys don't know what we're talking about, because we have our own jargon, we have our own acronyms. We speak about the vet sector, we speak about ASCO, we speak about UOCs, we speak about RPL, and people outside of our bubble do not necessarily know those acronyms. They do not necessarily know what we are talking about. Now, if you then relay that back to our RPL instructions and our RPL requirements, remember that 9 times out of 10, the person sitting there and looking at the RPL kit, the RPL candidate, are not necessarily from the vet sector, and they might not know the jargon. Our units of competency and the requirements of the unit of competency, they have been written in vet speak 9 times out of 10, and they've been written in vet speak format. Now, we as vet practitioners, we've all been trained how to interpret that. The man on the street does it. Interestingly enough, when we went and we developed all of the assessment tools for ARCP for the Cert 4 in RTO compliance, the Diploma of RTO Compliance Management, Diploma of Quality Auditing, because ARCP's Diploma of Quality Auditing is 100% contextualized to the vet sector, the skill sets that they offer, everything, because ARCP only trains within the vet sector, and because all of the learning material and the assessment tools have been 100% contextualized to the vet sector, when it came to writing the RPL tools, I had one of my team say to me, but hang on a second, given that ARCP only trains to vet practitioners, given that they do not train anybody outside of the vet sector, when we develop the RPL tools, certainly because the audience are all vet practitioners, certainly we don't have to go and contextualize and unpack every single requirement. But yet we had to. So ASPA doesn't sit there and it doesn't say, hey, is your audience the vet sector? Is your audience people that are familiar with all of the niche or the industry relevant jargon, or are they the man on the street? They simply say that your RPL instructions must be contextualized. Don't go and copy and paste them. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm just waffling on a little bit too much about that. Your RPL tool must also have a bank of questions and benchmark answers that your RPL assessors are going to ask the RPL candidate during the verbal conversation part of the assessment process. And remember, your RPL tools must also make provision for sufficiency of RPL evidence. And guys, the reason for that is this. When people do assessment by coursework, it's really, really simple. We've got our assessor guides with benchmark answers, and the assessors know exactly what it is that they're looking for. However, think about this for a moment. Because of the nature of an RPL assessment, it's a very, very subjective assessment process, and the RPL assessor needs to make a decision based on the information provided to them, whether or not the RPL candidate has got enough knowledge, experience, and evidence to be able to demonstrate that they still meet the requirements of the training product. So like I said, because an RPL assessment is a very subjective assessment process, your assessment kit for the candidates as well as for the assessors needs to be very, very clear on the sufficiency of documents. When we developed the RPL kits for ARCP, ARCP and I sat down, and I think the RPL kits, it's been a little while since we wrote them, but I think for the cert for the Diploma of RTO Compliance Management, I actually think for all of the training products that ARCP offers, I think their criteria is that they won't accept evidence older than 3 years. Because remember that if we look at the rules of evidence, the candidate must also be able to provide evidence that is current. So those are all considerations for your RPL tools. So, do perfectly compliant assessment tools really exist? And guys, this is very much applicable to commercially developed assessment tools, but you can also ask yourself these questions when it comes to assessment tools that have been developed specifically for your RTO, be it internally or whether your RTO went through a process of hiring contractors or whatever. Yes, a perfectly compliant assessment tool does exist. However, these 7 steps are necessary to go and confirm that your assessment tools are actually compliant. Once an assessment tool has been developed, or given that we are talking about buying assessment tools, no, actually, forget it for a sec. Once an assessment tool has been developed, whether you have purchased it commercially or whether you have developed it internally, or whether your RTO has used a bank of contractors to go and write the assessment tools, prior to implementation, you need to go and validate those assessment tools to ensure that the assessment tools that you are looking at meet absolutely every or address every single criteria of that unit of competency. You need to go and validate it to make sure that there is sufficiency. You need to go and validate it to make sure that there's enough clarity. And also to go and make sure, as I said, that all of the criteria have been addressed, and that's only the start of it. Now, I know that this webinar isn't about validation, but guys, I do just need to throw in there that please note that validation is a very, very it's a niche activity within the vet sector. It is a very specialized activity within the vet sector. And just because a trainer and assessor has got their TAE, and in the TAE they've done the validation unit, it does not mean that they actually know how to validate properly. I remember when I'm sitting with my Cert 4 and both of my diplomas in TAE. Forget about the Cert 4 a sec. I remember that when I did my 2 diplomas, I did it through one of the most renowned RTOs in Australia, and it was good. However, when it came to, and I'll speak about the validation specifically, when it came to the validation, the unit on validations, they didn't actually teach us how to validate properly. They, as so many other RTOs do, they taught you enough and they assessed you enough to be able to meet the criteria of the validation unit of competency. Just because somebody has completed that unit, a TAE unit on how to validate, it does not mean that they actually know how to validate properly. As I said just now, validation is very, very specialized. It takes a lot further learning than you do in your TAE unit, and it takes a lot of experience and knowledge to be able to validate effectively. So if your RTO uses your own internal trainers and assessors to do your validation, it might be a really good idea to at least do an internal audit on your validation or on your validation outcomes to see if your validation outcomes are actually valid. As I said just now, for assessment tools to be compliant, it needs to be contextualized to the cohort and to the delivery context. So I said just now in passing that the ARCP, all of their assessment tools and all of their learning material has been contextualized specifically for the vet sector. Because in ARCP's case, it doesn't make any sense to go and have qualifications and skill sets and unit of competencies that are, or doesn't make sense for them to go and train only vet practitioners and then to go and have off-the-shelf assessment and learning material that hasn't been contextualized to the vet sector. I know that there are a number of RTOs out there that that do the diploma of quality auditing. And I know there's one specific RTO that goes, oh, our diploma of quality auditing is very specific. It's been contextualized to the vet sector. We actually I was speaking to somebody the other day, and their RTO, I think, had 15 people do the diploma of quality auditing through unnamed RTO that said, oh, you know, we contextualized to the vet sector. And I think they completed 2 units. And I had this lady call me and she said to me, hey, do you know how ARCP does their QA? And I went, yeah. And she said, is it really contextualized? I went, yeah. And she went, because the other guys say it isn't, and it's not. And she said to me, is it hard contextualizing? And I said to her, no, it's not. Because if you know your target audience, and if you go to the effort of actually making sure that you're providing quality learning to your target audience, that also includes making sure that how they learn, what they learn, how they are assessed, and their assessment process is contextualized to their own niche within which they work, or to their own sector within which they work. Often when you buy commercially developed assessment tools, when it comes to validating those assessment tools, you often find that you might need to strengthen or enhance the assessment activities to make sure that all of the unit of competency requirements are met. And guys, after you've done this validation, it is essential that you then go and test your validated assessment tools to ensure that the new improved assessment tools are now also user-friendly. You also validate to confirm, as I said just now, that all of your unit of competency requirements are addressed. You then go and, like I said, implement it, and you then go and do your moderation to make sure that the rules of evidence are met, as well as the principles of assessment. So let's talk about this very, very quickly. You've got an assessment tool that you've purchased in. Before you go and implement it for the very first time, validate. Where you find gaps, and you will find gaps. I can guarantee you, in fact, I will put my ex-husband's liver on the fact that you absolutely, that was actually quite bad. I was meant to say my ex-husband's last penny. I don't know where the liver came from. Guys, go and validate your assessment tools, because your commercially developed assessment tools will not be 100% compliant. Validate them, go and identify the gaps, then go and fix the gaps, then go and validate it. And then only once your validation has shown that your assessment tools are compliant, then go and implement it. And guys, the same is true. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the same is true for if you have made any significant changes to your assessment material, they also need to be validated. But we do talk more about that in the validation webinar. So I said just now that if you have non-compliant assessment tools, the consequences are relatively dire. Non-compliant assessment tools leads to non-compliance of more than 9 clauses of the RTO standards. It doesn't only impact your clause 1.8, it impacts clause 1.1, which says that your RTO's operations and your training and your assessment that you deliver must be consistent with the requirements of the training product or the training products, packages, and accredited course. So if you have assessment tools that are not compliant because a PC here has been missed or a PE there has been missed, it means that your assessment tools fail clause 1.1, because training packages and accredited courses require people to demonstrate their competence in every single requirement of their training product. You are also going to be non-compliant with clause 1.3 of the standards, because the clause 1.3 says that your RTO must have strategies in place to consistently monitor your training and assessment strategies and practices. And if your tools are non-compliant, how can you, or an RTO that has non-compliant assessment tools, that is a sure sign that they do not have a sufficient system in place to consistently and continuously be monitoring their training and assessment practices and strategies. Clause 1.4 says that your RTO must meet all of the requirements of the specific and relevant training package or VET accredited course. Once again, if you have non-compliant assessment tools, you are automatically non-compliant with clause 1.4, but also clause 1.5, because your assessment practices must be relevant to the needs of the industry for which you are training people in. And I don't know of any industry out there that will go, you know what? Diploma of Quality Auditing says that auditors must have these and these and these and these skills. But you know what? If we have auditors running out there that only meet 75% of the requirements, we're happy. Guys, it doesn't work that way. So as I said, if your assessment tools are non-compliant, you have failed, your RTO has failed compliance of clause 1.5. You have also failed compliance with clause 1.8, because clause 1.8 is all about conducting effective assessment and ensuring that your rules of evidence are met during an assessment process, and also the principle of assessment. So if you have non-compliant assessment tools, how can a candidate or a learner, how can they demonstrate fully the their knowledge and their competency in that unit of competency, and therefore how could they have met the rules of evidence. You will fail clause 1.9 of the standards because clause 1.9 says that your RTO needs to conduct validation of assessment outcomes. Now, if you have non-compliant assessment tools, it doesn't matter if a student, a learner, has completed that the requirements of that non-compliant assessment tool 100%. If they're starting off with our base starting point is a non-compliant assessment tool, you are not enabling the student to be able to evidence fully their competency. And if your RTO is conducting the validation of the assessment outcomes that it should, it would be picked up at that validation process that your tools are not compliant. So if your RTO is still sitting there using non-compliant assessment tools, it brings into question your practices under clause 1.9. Remember, clause 2.1 requires your RTO to be compliant with the NVR Act and the RTO standards at all times. That includes having compliant assessment tools. Clause 2.2 requires your RTO to monitor assessment practices to ensure compliance with Standard 1. Once again, the same as with clause 1.3, that if your RTO is using non-compliant assessment tools and it isn't aware of it, then how can you possibly argue that you are not non-compliant with clause 2.2? If your RTO is using non-compliance assessment tools, it means that your clause 7.5 data provision that you do on the governance of your RTO cannot be correct unless you actually go and admit and say, yep, you know what, we use non-compliant assessment tools. It means that when your CEO is completing the declaration on compliance, it means that unless your CEO fesses up and says, yes, you know what, we spent all of last year working on non-assessment compliant tools, I'd actually want to go further with thought. Let's just say that in order for your CEO to be able to sign off that your RTO was compliant throughout the previous calendar year, you need to have compliant assessment tools. Clause 8.5 requires all RTOs to adhere to the state, territory, and Commonwealth legislation in which they operate. Guys, the NVR Act and the RTO standards, they are federal. They are Commonwealth. The NVR Act is a Commonwealth legislation, and the RTO standards are Commonwealth regulation. So if you have non-compliant assessment tool, you fail clause 8.5. There's also one that I haven't got on here, and I think it's clause 3.2. It's either clause 3.1 or clause 3.2 of the standards that is very, very clear. In an RTO may not issue any AQF certification, be it a staple of attainment or a full qualification, to anybody that hasn't fully demonstrated their competence with all of the requirements of the training product or the relevant training product. So, in other words, if your RTO is using non-compliant assessment tools, as I said just now, non-compliant assessment tools mean that your learners are not given the opportunity to fully demonstrate their competence in all of the training product criteria. If they haven't fully demonstrated all of their competence in every single requirement of that training product, it means that your RTO may not issue any statement of attainment or any testimonial or record of result related to that training product. And if you do, you have breached a major, major, major part of the NVR Act. So I'm hoping that you guys will see how non-compliant assessment tools all sort of tie together, or, the impact of non-compliant assessment tools, the impact that it has on your RTO's compliance. And then what is really, really concerning is that where you've had non-compliant assessment tools, your RTO then needs to go and go and rectify that non-compliance by going back to not only your current students, but also to former students and saying to them, hey, by the way, we messed up. We gave you non-compliant assessment tools, and would you mind coming back and just being reassessed? I don't know of many students that would jump with joy if that is presented to them. Guys, so just wrapping this up, there are, once again, in almost 2 decades, I have never, ever, ever come across one commercial provider whose assessment tools are 100% compliant. And in fact, when VETPrep started back, God knows when, we actually started because there was, at the time, it was a very, very well-renowned resource provider. I'm not going to mention who they are, who at that stage, the vet sector was all about, they were basically probably one of the best known names in the vet sector for resources, but their tools were so poorly written, they were so critically non-compliant that that's how VETPrep started. VETPrep started because of critically non-compliant commercial assessment tools. So I'm not suggesting for one moment, do not go and buy commercially developed assessment tools. What I am suggesting is when you go and buy them, please go in eyes wide open, go in being fully aware that statements such as they are fully compliant should be taken with a grain of salt and should be tested by your own RTO with validation. Statements such as they've passed a quadrillion audits, please take it with a grain of salt, because you will never have sufficient proof of the accuracy of that statement. So take it with a grain of salt and make sure that you actually go and validate the commercially developed assessment tools. And statements of we'll fix it if it fails audit, be very careful, because one thing I didn't mention when we spoke about this earlier on is when you speak to if you do fail audit, every single one of those commercial developers that we have dealt with over more than a decade, they will only go and fix the tools if you fail a regulatory audit. So if you come and you say, hey, we've had an internal audit done, we believe the tools are not compliant, they go, sorry, we're not prepared to fix unless you've been through a regulatory audit. Even if you go and you say, my compliance consultant has looked at this and we have failed an external audit conducted by our compliance consultant because of the tools, they are simply not interested. They need you to have failed an ASCOR audit for them then to go and fix their tools. And guys, once again, by then it's too late. I'm going to have a quick drink of my soft drink, and then we have got so many questions, so give me 2 seconds. Okay. So I have got, let me just enlarge this. Belinda, you've asked, what will ASCO do if an RTO does not have an RTOC in place currently? Belinda, I'm going to ask you, can you please send that question through to info@complianceinstitute.edu.au. I need to, that's something I'd like to address with you in a phone call. It's a very, very specific question. Alec, I'm glad that what I've discussed makes sense to you. Guys, I've had more comments that we lost sound about a half an hour ago. I'm hoping that people could hear me properly. Denise, you've said that nowhere in the standards does it say that we have to validate our assessment tools before they are implemented. First of all, with the current draft standards that we are expecting to be released sometime in 2024, there's currently in the draft standards, they are pushing very, very hard for pre-implementation validation. But Denise, to go back to your question, the standards don't spell out that you need to go and validate pre-implementation. But my question to you is this: if you do not go and validate before you implement those assessment tools, how do you know that your assessment tools address all of the requirements of the training product? And we've just gone through the consequences of not going and doing your pre-implementation validation. So I'd suggest have a think about that, because as I said earlier on, no, it isn't explicit in the RTO standards, but it certainly is there in 10 of the RTO, in 10 of the clauses of the RTO standards. Josh, you've said, Alex, you've previously spoken about the RTO Validator Certification Program. Can you tell me a bit more? Guys, 2 seconds about that. This isn't about the Validator Certification Program, but ARCP has launched a RTO Validator Certification Program, which consists of, I think it's 3 of one skill set. And then there's also a 2-day validation workshop that I'll be running for the course participants, where all that we'll be doing for 2 days is we're going to be validating and validating and validating and validating. And when we are tired of validating, we are going to go head up, take a breath, and carry on validating for 2 days. And the whole purpose of the validation workshop is so that attendees should walk out of the workshop being hotshot validators. And certainly the whole purpose of the certified validator or the validator credential program is so that people can actually learn how to validate properly and validate to the level that your RTO should, or your tool should pass and ask for audit, and certainly should be ready for sort of so you shouldn't find yourself in areas of non-compliance as we spoke there. Joe, you said you'd like to disagree with me about the TAE validation unit not being sufficient. Joe, I don't think this is the appropriate forum to be having a debate on that, but you know what, mate, if you want to reach out to me individually, you're more than welcome to. You're more than welcome to contact me and have a discussion. However, as I said, almost 2 decades in this game, and happy to chat with you about that offline. I've got time for one more question. Kelly, you've said, how do we pick a commercial provider? Kelly, it's really, really hard. What we do with our clients, and look, so often when we are helping setting up RTOs, or when an RTO's assessment tools are that broken that it's easy to go and buy new assessment tools, we also go to commercial providers. And obviously, we've got a very good idea of the quality of certain providers' tools. And look, let me just make one thing clear. There are providers out there that have good assessment tools. However, these providers that I have got really, really bad assessment tools. So I'm not saying that all providers write bad assessment tools. I'm just saying that I have yet to come across one single provider that actually has 100% compliant assessment tools. When we are helping RTOs shop around for assessment tools, we've obviously got our guys that we know write good assessment tools, but we will always go to them, we'll always say to them, hey, can you give us one unit as a sample? We will go and get that unit. We will then go and validate that unit left, right, and center. And based on that, we can then say to our RTO client, look, this is the outcome of the validation. And if you go and you purchase the rest of the suite of the tools, this is the kind of rectification that you can expect that should be done, or that should be needed for the assessment tools. Vinit, you've asked, now the questions are coming in, or more questions are coming in. Vinit, you've asked, can we validate the same unit twice? Absolutely. As I said earlier on, a really good practice is to the new tool validate, fix, or validate, gap fill, validate, gap fill, validate until such time as it is compliant. I know that obviously VETPrep, or not obviously, but VETPrep manages or helps ARCP with their compliance, and ARCP doesn't validate on a 5-year plan. They validate on average every 12 months, even if the tools haven't changed. Because when it comes to validation, validation is also a really good way to pick up continuous improvement for tools. But also, I know that ARCP likes, or they prefer a operational method where the tools are validated regularly to make sure that they always have compliant assessment tools. Debbie, you've asked about providers that have good assessment tools. Please contact me offline. Happy to chat with it, to chat about you with that. Belinda, you said we noticed recently too that multiple providers are actually all linked, and the resources, while rebranded, are actually all the same. So be wary. Yeah, good one. Good one. Also, guys, generally speaking, the majority of these guys that are commercial assessment tool developers, they actually don't have, or to the best of my knowledge, they actually don't have full-time staff that do assessment tool development. They go out and contract contractors to go and write it. And guys, I could be wrong, there might be the odd exception, but generally speaking, most of these assessment tool, the commercial assessment tool providers, they simply go out to contractors. And yeah, it could very well be a case of